The next structural pseudo-class selectors we're going to be talking about are nth-child. Nth-child selectors allow us to target elements based on patterns that describe which elements within a parent that you actually want to target. There are 4 different flavors of nth-child selectors available to us. There's nth-child, nth of type, nth-last child, and last of type. And I'll be showing you how these work in the next few videos. The only difference with nth-child and some of the other syntax that we're using is that you have a sort of argument that you can pass on a numerical value into the selector, and it describes the pattern that's going to be targeted. So this is going to make a lot more sense once I show it to you. So let's just go ahead and see how this works. This is the file that we're going to be using, and all it is reminiscent of one of the last pages that we were working on, but I just made an unordered list with 20 list items. So you can see here I just have an unordered list with these 20 list items, really simple page. What I'm going to do to start off with is I'm going to make a rule that is just going to target the list item. So I'm going to say list item, and then I'll put the column for the pseudo selector, and we're going to put nth child. And then, as I mentioned, nth child is going to take on a parameter. So in here, I'm just going to put a 2. This is going to create something that's really basic here, and what we'll do is we'll just set the background color, and I'll just make that white. If we go and look at this in the browser, you can see that what happens is the second item is now selected. I passed on the argument of 2 into my code, and if I change that to 7 or something like that, and we save and we refresh, you can see that now the 7th item is selected. So by passing on a number, it's just going to select the 7th number of that particular grouping of items. So this is really basic. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to, instead of just passing on a straight number, I'm going to change this back to 2, but I'm going to change it to 2n. This n creates a grouping element, and what it does is instead of just targeting the second element, it's going to target every second element. So it kind of is going to create a repeating pattern where it's grouping every second element. Let's just look at that in the browser. When I refresh now, you can see that all of the even numbered items are now selected with this background color. In addition to using the numbers like we just did right here, you can also pass on keywords. So I could go ahead and put odd in here, and if I put odd and we look in the browser, now every other list item starting with the odd numbered list items are going to be selected. And you could also do even, which would give us the same results as just putting in 2n. These are really helpful when you want to create some sort of like zebra striping pattern with a list or with a table or something like that, where you want every other one to be styled in a particular way to make the formatting a little bit easier to read. This gets a little bit more fun because you can put more complex mathematical calculations inside these parentheses. The next one that we're going to be looking at is going to create an offset. So an offset is created by putting a number, we're just going to use 2n, and then I'm going to say plus 1. Let me describe what this offset does. The offset changes where we begin within the count. So normally we always start counting at 1, but when we do an offset, it basically says grab every second one beginning with this one. It's kind of another way of just saying odd. So it's saying start the count at 1 and then get every other one. So it's going to get the first item and then it's going to do that for every second one. So if we save now and we refresh in the browser, nothing should actually change on our page. We're just selecting these items as though we are selecting the odd numbered items. If I change this to 3n, it's going to start the count at 1, but then it's going to select every third item. So if we save now and we come back and refresh, you can see that it starts with 1 and then it's going to 1, 2, 3, get the third item, 1, 2, 3, get the next third item, and etc., etc. So in this manner, you can actually select pretty complex groups of a system and style them in a particular way. It's really an excellent way that you can very easily create these complex selections within a group. It does seem a little confusing initially, but you just have to remember that all it's saying here is that the second number is indicating where you start the count from, and then this number right here is going to be specifying what the offset is. So if I changed this second number to 3 and then I said 3n, well, it's going to start at the third item and then do an offset of 3 items. So again, it's going to count by threes, essentially 3, 6, 9, 12, etc. So if you wanted to select every fifth item starting with the fifth one, I would change the second number to the number that I wanted to start with, and then I would just change the offset. So if I do 5n plus 5, it's now going to select every fifth item. So 5, 10, 15, and 20 are going to be selected. Now, in addition to doing this, you can also use negative numbers. And negative values are going to dramatically change how this works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change my grouping. I'm going to change this grouping to -2n. Let's start the count at 8. So what the negative number on the grouping does is, instead of counting up the way that we've looked at it in all the other examples, it's going to start wherever the count is. So in this case, it's going to start at 8, and then it's going to go backwards. So instead of going down the list, it's going to go up the list. So in here, it's going to select 8, then 6, then 4, then 2. If we save and look at this in the browser, you can see it starts my count at 8, and then it goes up the list instead of going down the list. So with negative numbers, you can go ahead and you can select kind of backwards up the list, if you will. Let's change this up again. I'm going to change my start to 1. Let's change the offset to 5n, and then instead of using a plus right here, let's use a minus right here. If we save this and look at it in the browser, you can see that it's selecting every fifth item, but by using a negative number, it's offset or shifted this up. So instead of selecting 5, 10, 15, and 20, it now shifts, because we used -1, it shifts everything up. So now we're getting 4, and then we're still counting by fives. We just have shifted our count up one number. So for instance, if I went back here and I changed this to 5n minus 2, it's now going to count by fives, but it's going to shift the count so it starts at number 3. So if we save and we go look in the browser, now it starts by 3 and I'm adding 5 every time. So I'm counting by fives again. So all this does is just shifting everything up. You're still spacing it out by the same number, but you're just shifting it up. That's how you can think about it. So all of these methods of selecting items, once you get the grasp of how the math works, they're fairly simple. You can also actually string together selections and make really complex selections. So I'm going to change this in here. I'm going to still use nth-child, but I'm going to use 1n plus 6. So just pause the movie for a minute and think about what this is going to do. Remember, this number indicates where we're starting the count from. This is going to indicate the offset. So all this should do right now is start the count at the 6th item, and all the rest of the items should be selected. And there you go. It just gets everything starting at 6. So that's pretty simple. We've talked about that before. But what we're going to do here is we're going to daisy chain or combine this selector with another nth child selector. So I'm going to use a colon here, and then I'm going to use nth dash last child. And in my parentheses, I'm going to use the same selector. So we'll just use 1n plus 6. When I use nth last child and pass on these parameters, we know that we're starting at the 6th element. But because I'm using last child, it's going to start the count at the end of the list. So this is going to be an offset for the last child. Let me just show you before we look at this together. Let me just cut the first part just so you can see the nth last child working in this way. If I save this and we look in the browser, you can see that it starts the count from the bottom, and then it's going to select the 6th one and select everything from there. So it kind of just did the opposite of what we had before. Let's go back in here, and I'm going to add back in my daisy chain selector, my combined nth child selectors. And so what's this going to do right here is this first part is still going to select, starting at the 6th one, every other child. But I've also daisy chained in the nth last child, so it's going to work from the bottom up. So let's just save this and look at it in the browser. And you can see what happens. The first part starts the count at 6 and selects down. The last part of our selector starts the last child count 6 in and then selects up from there. So you can see what I end up doing right here. It's going to select every element within this range. It's kind of forcing these to meet in the middle. It's going to select all of these except for the first 5 elements and except for the last 5 elements. So in this way, you can make some pretty sophisticated, more complex groups of selectings. Think about this for a second. What if I now wanted to switch this around and select the first 5 and the last 5? Well, we would use similar types of logic, but we're going to have to change the numbers a little bit. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to now use the first 5. I'm going to start the count at 5 and I'm going to use 1n, but because I want to move up in my list, not down in my list, I'm going to switch this to a negative number. So nth child, negative 1n plus 5. If we just get rid of this for a second, you'll see what this does. It's going to now select the first 5 elements. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a group selector to add in the rest. I can't daisy chain this together. I'm going to have to use a comma, and then I'm going to add my li nth last child, and again I'm going to use the same selector. I want to start at the 5th one, but I'm going to use negative 1n. So this will force it to count down. So if I refresh, now it gets the first 5 items and the last 5 items. I know some of these more intricate selections can be a little bit confusing. What I encourage you to do is just to start working with the basic selectors and try to come up with patterns and then figuring out a way that you can select them using the nth child selectors. Once you get a handle of them, they're an excellent way that you can manage styling groups of content in a particular way. And in the next lesson, I'll show you a more practical application of this.